On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Alex found himself knee-deep in boxes and old, dusty trinkets. He was surrounded by the remnants of his grandfather Henry's life, left in the small attic of his childhood home. Only 2 weeks had passed since Henry's funeral, and Alex had volunteered to help sort through his belongings. His grandfather had been a pillar in his life, steady, gentle, and strong, with a quiet, reserved nature that rarely revealed more than it needed to. It was while shifting a particularly heavy stack of photo albums that Alex's hand brushed against something unexpected. Hidden beneath a pile of old newspapers and magazines was a small, worn-out leather-bound diary. Its cover was scratched, the leather faded with time, and its pages appeared crinkled with age. Alex hadn't known his grandfather kept a diary. In fact, he was taken aback. Henry had never been one for sharing his personal thoughts, let alone writing them down. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened it, his fingers grazing the familiar, yet now oddly intimate handwriting of his grandfather. Here's what was written in the diary. It was an ordinary evening. I'd come home early, hoping to surprise her. Maybe take her to that little place by the river she loved. As soon as I stepped through the door, though, I noticed it. The house was too quiet, that strange silence when someone's there, but they don't want you to know. I found her in the living room. She was with him. She looked up, eyes wide, and he sat there, relaxed, as though he belonged. They hadn't expected me. Why would they? I'd missed every sign. In a rage, I lunged at him, fists clenched and heart pounding. He barely had time to stand before I was on him, my hands around his collar, shoving him back. He stumbled, nearly falling, but I didn't stop. The force of my anger pushed him against the wall, my fist drawn back, ready to strike. But then I caught a glimpse of her, standing there, frozen, horror in her eyes. I let go, my knuckles trembling, and stepped back. Without a word, I turned and left. The night swallowed me as I wandered the streets alone, trying to hold on to fragments of a life that no longer made sense. Alex held the diary tightly, feeling the weight of his grandfather's secrets. Taking a deep breath, he turned the page, and Henry's story continued, revealing his relationships with two very different women, each one reflecting a different stage in his search for meaning and solace. After that night, when I left her standing in the living room with him, I needed to find a way to numb the pain, to distract myself from the hollow ache in my chest. I became someone new, a man seeking adventure, thrill, and forgetfulness in equal measure. It was on one of these restless nights that I met Evelyn. The jazz club was alive, vibrating with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the smoky tunes of a saxophone. Evelyn stood out from the crowd immediately, confident, magnetic, and completely at ease in the vibrant chaos around her. She laughed loudly, unashamedly, like someone who knew how to find joy wherever she was. Her laugh was infectious, reaching the farthest corners of the dimly lit room, and for a moment, I found myself drawn to her light. I made my way to the bar and leaned over with a nod in her direction. "It's not often you see someone having this much fun alone," I said, smiling as she glanced up at me. She smirked, raising an eyebrow. "Who says I'm alone?" She paused, looking me over. "You're here now, aren't you?" I laughed, caught off guard. "Fair point. I'm Henry, by the way." "Evelyn," she replied, clinking her glass against mine. "Tell me, Henry, are you here to brood or to dance?" I felt a smile pull on my lips, the first real one in a long time. "Let's say I'm open to suggestions." With that, Evelyn grabbed my hand, pulling me onto the dance floor without another word. Everything was fast-paced and intense with her. She moved with abandon, the music pulsing through her every step, and I matched her, caught up in the rhythm of the night. When we finally took a break, she was breathless, eyes sparkling as we collapsed back at the bar. "All right, Henry," she said, looking at me over the rim of her glass. "What brings you here tonight? A man like you doesn't end up in a jazz club alone unless he's either running from something or looking for something." I hesitated, the usual ache rising up. "Maybe a little of both," I said, hoping to deflect. "But you? You seem like you know what you're looking for." Evelyn laughed, a low, throaty sound. "I'm looking to live," she said, "to taste every moment, to break rules, to feel the thrill of it all." She took a sip and tilted her head, her eyes gleaming. What about you, Henry? You look like someone who could use a little thrill. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn was all thrill. She pulled me into late-night drives where we'd race down empty roads, the wind whipping through the open windows. She called me her wild man, urging me to let loose, to embrace the thrill and live fully in the present. Come on, wild man, she'd whisper, tugging my hand as we sneaked into closed rooftops, her voice full of daring. Tell me there isn't anything you regret more than holding back. She had a way of challenging me, of pulling me into her orbit. One night, under the neon lights, I found myself asking, Evelyn, don't you ever stop, slow down? She tilted her head, a sly smile on her lips. Why would I? Life's too short to waste it sitting around thinking about what could be. Each night with her was exhilarating, a way to forget. But as dawn approached and the sun began to rise, the thrill would fade, and the same loneliness would return, sharper than before. One morning, as we watched the sky shift from black to gray, Evelyn sighed and looked over at me, eyes softening for the first time. So, what's hiding behind all that brooding, Henry? She traced a finger down my arm, her voice gentle. You're not like the others. You're running, aren't you? I felt the walls I'd built tremble slightly. Maybe I am, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. But some things, they don't just disappear. No matter how far you run. Evelyn looked away, her eyes distant for a moment. Well, maybe that's why we make the most of it. No looking back. She smiled again, the momentary vulnerability disappearing. Come on, wild man. The night's still young. In time, I found myself struggling to keep up with her relentless pace. I began to realize that her laughter, her energy, was like a spark that couldn't light the darkness for long. The thrill that had once been intoxicating started to feel hollow, like a mask slipping off. I played the part of the carefree man she saw in me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was only papering over wounds that were too deep to heal. Eventually, even Evelyn sensed the distance between us. One night, as we sat quietly watching the city lights from her car, she glanced at me with an understanding I hadn't expected. You're not like me, Henry, she said softly. You're looking for something real. I can tell. Maybe I am, I replied, feeling the ache settle in once again. But you, Evelyn, you're incredible. She laughed lightly, brushing off the compliment. We had fun, didn't we? We did, I agreed, knowing it was true. We'd shared a spark, a glimpse of light in a dark time. But in the end, we were both seeking something different. Without any formal goodbye, we drifted apart. There was no need for words. Evelyn was a bright, beautiful burst of color that had briefly illuminated my world, a spark that had kept the darkness at bay. But I knew, deep down, that I was still searching for a different kind of connection, something that could endure even after the night ended. Alex felt a pang of sadness for his grandfather as he closed that chapter of the diary. Evelyn had been a temporary balm, a bright, fleeting moment in his life that could never fully mend the wounds he carried. Taking a deep breath, Alex turned the page and continued reading, diving into Henry's story with another woman who had left an indelible mark on his life. It was a rainy afternoon when I met Mary. I had wandered into a quiet bookstore, hoping to lose myself in the familiar comfort of old books. I was reaching for a poetry collection when, unexpectedly, another hand brushed against mine. Startled, we both looked up, and she gave a small, awkward laugh, pulling her hand back slightly. Sorry, she said softly, her voice warm. It seems I'm not the only one interested in Neruda today. I chuckled, trying to mask my surprise. Not at all. Clearly, I have good taste if it matches yours. She smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'm Mary, she introduced herself gently, and something in her voice put me at ease almost instantly. Henry, I replied, extending my hand. She shook it lightly, her touch as calm and reassuring as her presence. We ended up talking about the book, discussing favorite lines and poems. Her love for literature was genuine, and we drifted naturally into other subjects, art, music, and even little mysteries of life. As we spoke, I could sense a quiet depth in her gaze, an attentive curiosity that felt rare. "Do you come here often?" she asked, glancing around at the quiet shelves. "Not often enough," I admitted, smiling. "But there's something about the rain and old books that feels right, don't you think?" She nodded, looking out the window as raindrops trickled down the glass. "Yes, it feels safe. Safe." The word resonated, and for the first time in a while, I felt a sense of peace. Unlike Evelyn, Mary didn't fill the space with energy and excitement. Instead, she brought a calm, steady presence that seemed to soothe my restless soul. Our connection grew gradually from there. We spent quiet evenings in cafes, listening to the rain outside as we spoke about our dreams and regrets. On one such evening, as we sipped tea and watched the world pass by, she looked at me thoughtfully. "So, Henry," she said, her voice gentle but probing, "what do you dream of?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, unsure if I should reveal the truth. But something about Mary's gaze encouraged me. Honestly, I began fidgeting slightly. "I'm not sure anymore. I used to think I had it all figured out, but now it feels like I'm still searching." She nodded slowly, as if she understood. "Sometimes I think searching is what keeps us moving forward," she said. "As long as we don't stop looking, there's always hope." With Mary, I didn't feel the need to perform, to put on a mask. We would stroll along the river, watching the sunset in comfortable silence, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone else. She didn't just listen. She seemed to understand, as if she could see the pain and turmoil I'd tried to hide. One evening, as we sat under a starlit sky on a grassy hill overlooking the city, Mary turned to me with a look I hadn't seen before, nervous, almost shy. "Henry," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to tell you." I reached out, taking her hand. "What is it?" She looked down, gathering her thoughts before meeting my gaze. I'm expecting." Her words hung in the air, and I could see the mixture of joy and apprehension in her eyes. For a moment, I was speechless. A surge of love, hope, and fear washed over me all at once. "Mary, are you serious?" I managed, my voice unsteady. She nodded, smiling tentatively. "Yes, I didn't want to keep it from you. I thought you should know." I took a deep breath, my hand tightening around hers. "I don't know what to say," I confessed, my heart racing. I want this to work, Mary. I want to give you and the child the life you deserve." Her smile softened, and she squeezed my hand. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, leaning her head on my shoulder. "One step at a time." But despite the warmth of her words, the weight of my past bore down on me. As much as I wanted to stay, to be the man she needed, the mistakes I had made haunted me. I felt a profound sense of unworthiness, a nagging doubt that I could truly offer them the stability they deserved. In the following days, the turmoil inside me grew. I became distant, my thoughts tangled in a web of fear and regret. One evening, Mary noticed my silence and gently touched my arm. "Henry, what's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "You seem far away." I took a shaky breath, unable to meet her eyes. "Mary, you deserve someone better," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. "Someone who isn't carrying all this baggage. Someone who can offer you and the child a steady life." Her face fell, and I could see the pain in her eyes. "Henry, we don't need perfection," she said softly. "We just need you." But I shook my head, the weight of my decision heavy in my chest. "You deserve more than I can give," I said, my heart breaking with each word. "You and the child. You deserve a life free from the shadows I carry." She bit her lip, tears pooling in her eyes, and for a moment, we just stood there, both of us carrying the weight of what might have been. Finally, she stepped back, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "Goodbye, Henry," she whispered. "Goodbye, Mary," I replied, my voice cracking. And with that, we parted, both of us holding onto the fragments of a love that would linger long after we were gone. Alex's heart grew heavier as he read on, feeling his grandfather's quiet anguish, yet sensing a glimmer of hope woven into his words. Henry's life had continued, shaped by Mary's memory and his lingering sense of duty to a family he never truly felt part of. But then, Henry's words shifted to a turning point. Years passed, and the ache that Mary left behind became part of me. I'd settled into routines, content to be a friend to those around me, never more, and only allowed myself glimpses of our daughter from afar. Time softened the pain, but it never erased her memory. It was my old friend Michael who unknowingly changed everything. One evening, over drinks, he mentioned Mary's daughter, whom he'd met through a mutual friend. He didn't know she was my daughter, of course, and spoke casually, unaware of the impact his words had. "She's grown up, you know," he said with a wistful smile. "A young woman now, has a child of her own." A strange feeling washed over me. Pride, longing, sadness. The realization struck me harder than I'd expected. My daughter, who I'd barely known, was now a mother. My mind raced with thoughts of the life she'd led, her milestones, her dreams, her family. I wanted to know her, to see her, to understand the life I'd missed. But I wasn't sure how. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking of ways to quietly enter her world without disrupting the life Mary and I had worked so hard to protect. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I returned to their lives cautiously, careful not to intrude. I arrived at Mary's door one rainy afternoon, unannounced but hopeful. She opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Henry?" Her voice was a mixture of shock and something else. Understanding, perhaps, or something even gentler. "Hello, Mary." I smiled, nerves coursing through me. I was in the area and, well, I thought I'd stop by. She looked at me for a moment, and then stepped aside, inviting me in. The house was warm, filled with family photos, memories I had never been a part of. I caught sight of a small photograph on the mantel. My daughter, a young child in her arms, laughing. It felt like looking through a window into a life that had grown beautifully in my absence. As we sat across from each other, Mary's expression softened. "She doesn't know Henry. Our daughter, I nodded, expecting as much. I didn't come to disrupt anything, I assured her. I wanted to be nearby. However close or distant you think is best." Mary smiled, and in that moment I knew she understood. "Maybe you could be an uncle, a friend of the family," she suggested, her voice filled with kindness. "It would be enough, wouldn't it?" "Yes," I said, the word barely a whisper. "It would be enough." In the years that followed, I became Uncle Henry, a steady, unassuming presence. My daughter never questioned it, accepting me easily into her family. She called me Uncle, and though it didn't carry the truth, it was close enough. Over time, I became Grandpa Henry to her little one, who loved to sit on my knee and hear stories of long-ago adventures. One summer evening, during a family barbecue, Mary and I found ourselves alone on the back porch, watching as our daughter and her child played in the yard. Laughter floated through the warm evening air, and for a moment, all felt right. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like?" I asked her softly, breaking the comfortable silence. She gazed into the distance, her face touched with a thoughtful smile. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I wouldn't change anything. She's had a good life. She's happy. And I think that's what matters, don't you?" I nodded, feeling the weight of years lift just a bit. "That's all that matters," I agreed. We watched them in silence for a while longer, savoring the beauty of the moment. Then, she took my hand briefly, a touch that held years of unspoken understanding. "Thank you, Henry," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for finding a way back. For being here." I nodded, unable to find words. "I think I needed this as much as they did." I finally admitted, the truth of it settling deep within me. One night, years later, after I'd settled further into my role as Grandpa Henry, I found myself babysitting. My granddaughter, now old enough to form sentences and full of questions, was sitting beside me, wide-eyed and curious. "Grandpa Henry," she said, leaning closer, "will you tell me a secret?" I chuckled, amused by the seriousness in her voice. "A secret, you say?" She nodded earnestly. "Yes, you're very good at secrets, aren't you?" I paused, surprised by the innocence of her insight. "I suppose I am," I replied softly, reaching out to ruffle her hair. What kind of secret do you want to know? She looked thoughtful, her brow furrowing. Why do you always look at mommy like you're proud? Her question caught me off guard, the simplicity of it nearly undoing me. I swallowed hard, gathering my thoughts before answering. Because she's special, I said, my voice steady. And I'm very lucky to know her. She seemed satisfied with that, snuggling against me as we watched the stars begin to twinkle through the window. And though the truth remained unspoken, I felt that, in some way, she understood. Alex set down the diary, his mind reeling with emotions. His grandfather's words had uncovered a truth both simple and profound. A man who had carried the weight of his choices with quiet dignity, who had found a way to love deeply, even in silence. He thought of his own life, the choices he had yet to make, the people he had yet to understand fully. There, in the quiet attic, he made a promise to himself. He would carry forward the lessons his grandfather had left behind, honoring the love that had endured through secrecy and sacrifice. As Alex closed the diary for the last time, he felt closer to his grandfather than ever, grateful for the gift of this story, a story he now knew was, in a way, his own. Alex sat there in the quiet attic, the diary clutched tightly in his hands. The words he'd read, the glimpses into his grandfather's private world, had shaken his understanding of Henry and of himself. His grandfather had always seemed like a strong, quiet man who preferred peace over confrontation, but now Alex realized that he'd carried profound burdens, hidden behind a calm exterior. After a long moment, Alex tucked the diary back into its hiding spot. He wasn't ready to share it, not yet. This story was something he needed to carry alone for a while, to understand what it meant for him and his family. In the weeks that followed, Alex found himself returning again and again to his memories of his grandfather. Each one was now painted with new colors, enriched by the understanding he'd gained from the diary. Small moments, like Henry's smile as he watched Alex play, or the times he'd quietly offered advice, now felt deeper, as if those simple gestures had held a silent promise of love and protection. One evening, during a family gathering at his mother's house, Alex found himself alone in the kitchen with his mom. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the room, and the sound of laughter drifted in from the living room where his father and siblings were talking. Alex's mother, engrossed in preparing dinner, glanced at him. "You've been quiet lately, Alex," she said with a gentle smile, looking at him closely. "Is everything all right?" Alex hesitated, feeling the weight of the secrets he carried. He wanted to tell her what he'd discovered, to share the truth that her father, his grandfather, had hidden for so many years. But as he watched her, he realized that this truth wasn't his to share yet. "Yeah, Mom," he replied, nodding slowly. "I've just been thinking about Grandpa a lot. He really loved us, didn't he?" She smiled softly, her eyes misting over. "He did. Your grandfather didn't always say much, but he showed his love in 100 small ways. He was always there for us." There was a pause, and then she continued, her voice softer. "When you were born, he took to you instantly. He'd hold you for hours, just looking at you, as if you were the greatest gift he'd ever been given." She laughed gently, a bittersweet sound. "He'd probably say the same about every grandchild. He was so proud of you, all of you." Alex smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. "He really did have a big heart," he said carefully, trying to find the words to express what he felt. His mother put a hand on his shoulder. "If he taught me anything, Alex, it's that sometimes the most important things in life don't need to be said. It's how we show up for the people we love that matters." Her words mirrored the sentiments in the diary, so closely that Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. In that moment, he realized that his grandfather had, indeed, left his legacy through love, presence, and quiet resilience. He had never needed words to express his love. He had shown it by being there, by sacrificing, and by carrying the weight of his choices with dignity. As the evening went on, Alex found himself sitting quietly in the corner of the living room, watching his family laugh and talk. His father was telling a story about a fishing trip gone wrong, his siblings chiming in with laughter, and his mother shook her head, amused. For the first time, Alex saw it all through Henry's eyes. A family held together by love, laughter, and the silent understanding that they'd always be there for one another. Henry's choices, however difficult, had ultimately given them this foundation. The man who had been a quiet figure in the background had been, in his own way, the heart of their family.